Well, hello there everyone. My name is David Luchford and welcome to lesson 79 of my Ancient Greek course. In today's lesson we're going to be continuing to learn about the passive voice, and in particular today we're going to be learning about the future indicative passive. So that is the passive voice in the indicative mood in the future tense. And I shall tell you exactly how we translate that and also how we form it in Greek in just a moment. But first of all, let us take a look at my virtual shelves. If we do that, we shall see that my newest set of shelves, the arrow, signifying our trajectory in life and in Greek, okay, in our knowledge of Greek, is now full because of the generous support of the following people to whom I would like to give my thanks, okay? So a big thank you to the following people, namely Wilkley, Dan, Natan, Caroline, Gregory, and Tony Knows. Thank you all so much for your generous support. We've got some new supporters like Wilkley, Natan, and Gregory, and some long-term supporters like Dan, Caroline, and the David, the fellow David, who donated this time in the name of Tony Knows. And the reason he donated in the name of Tony Knows on this occasion is because he and a friend named Jenny have this joke where when they're dealing with a question that they don't know the answer to, they'll say, Tony knows. I guess a bit like how people say God knows, you know. Funnily enough, in Russian, they say fig znает. Now, fig is the noun for fig. I'm not a fruits and vegetables person, okay, but I'll put a picture of a fig on the screen. And znает means he, she, or it knows. So fig znает means fig knows, a fig knows. That's what they would say as their polite idiom for who knows. Apparently, according to David and Jenny, Tony knows. Anyway, thank you all so much for filling the most recent set of shelves. I really appreciate your support. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you will see that Caroline has once again bought 7 virtual amphorae. Caroline has been a long-term supporter of the channel, and Caroline and I have corresponded a bit over Buy Me a Coffee, and she sent me something amazing which she created, okay, which I would like to show to you. So, without further ado, let's turn the lights down because we're now going to look at Caroline's frog story, okay? This is a story made by Caroline, a long-term supporter of the channel. It starts off with quite a sad scene though, and that's why you can hear that music in the background, because it's a pretty emotional story, okay? It's got a heartwarming ending, but it starts off quite sad. So you've been warned. Because the first scene in this story is, for a while there, it didn't look good for Froggy. And you can see that this frog, made by Caroline, the very talented Caroline, is pinned down like frogs are in horrific scientific experiments. I think Caroline knows how much I hate animal experimentation and animal cruelty of all forms. So this is a very sad scene for me, okay? I feel for Froggy greatly. But, ladies and gentlemen, luckily this is not all that happens in the story, because although it didn't look good for Froggy for a while, Caroline tells us, but while his captors weren't looking, he ripped himself free of his chains and went into hiding. Look at that adorable frog that's now free, and he looks happier, you know, he looks much happier. If only this could actually happen with all of the animals that are kept in labs, you know. Honestly. Just terrible. It's just... If I think about it too much, I get depressed and angry, you know. But anyway, let's focus on the story. Froggy escaped and he went into hiding. He was constantly moving, never quite sure he was safe. Which, I said he looks happier, but he's still nervous. He's still worried about being captured. And when his pursuers were finally given the slip, he bought a little ship and sailed away to pastures new. Isn't that sweet? Okay, so Froggy escapes from those horrific people that were treating him so terribly and gets away to pastures new, to a happier place. And Caroline tells us, and was never seen again, probably. That was the classic story that she sent me. I say classic. That was the story that she sent me, but then she added to it, which is why I call it the classic story, because she later sent me this picture, telling me that Froggy had since been spotted delving into some Euripides, okay? Euripides is one of the big three ancient Greek tragedians, that is, authors of Greek tragedies. And you can see that Froggy here is checking out Euripides' Bacchae. The Bacchae is a play about the followers of Dionysus. Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy and frenzy. He was also called Bacchus, in Greek Bacchos. And the Bacchae, therefore, are the devotees of Bacchus, or Dionysus. And they're pretty wild, okay? They're ladies, and they're pretty wild ladies. If you've got the stomach for it, check out what happens in the Bacchae, okay? The Bacchae are some crazy ladies, from what I remember. I actually saw a rendition of it at the Greek summer school, in Greek. That's pretty much my only experience with the Bacchae, I think. And yeah, I remember some crazy stuff happening. But anyway, I know Caroline loves the Greek tragedies, and for that reason I have included an extract from a Greek tragedy in today's lesson. Before we move on though, I just want to say a huge thank you to Caroline for sending me this. She didn't expect me to show it, she just sent it as something sweet, basically. But I did check with her, she was happy for me to share it with you. She was okay with it, at least. And I just find it so wholesome, you know, because although it has a sad beginning, it's got a happy ending, which I think is nice and wholesome. And assuming that Caroline made this frog, which I think she did, how talented is she, you know? I mean, she's talented in any case for making these scenes in this story, but I assume that she has crocheted? Knitted? I'm not into crafts, so somebody in the comments can tell me whether this is a crocheted frog or a knitted frog, but she is clearly incredibly talented, and I hope that my viewers, that is you at home, I hope that you have enjoyed Caroline's story here, okay? Which I felt like I had to share with you, given my love of frogs, animals in general, and also Greek, which Froggy ends up getting into. And with that said, I would of course also like to thank all of my previous supporters as well. You are all absolute legends. And I would like to add that Andre has completed another 5 Greek lessons and has thus bought another 5 virtual amphorae. Thank you very much for that, Andre, and keep up the good work with the Greek. You've now completed at least 50 lessons. That is a tremendous amount of Greek. And if you are watching this right now, then I presume that most of you at least will have completed perhaps 78 lessons at this point. Also, an incredible amount of Greek, so really well done for that. Really well done for that, and do keep it up, okay? I hope that you're finding it satisfying being able to read more and more ancient Greek. Now, I know that we're coming up to my seasonal shelf. You will see that on my seasonal shelf, I have got a vanilla milkshake from McDonald's. That is because today, the 19th of June, the day of filming, is allegedly National Vanilla Milkshake Day. So that is what we're celebrating today, okay? What's your favourite flavour of McDonald's milkshake when their machine is working, you know? Funnily enough, I have actually worked at McDonald's before. For 2 months, I worked at McDonald's. I was nearly always in the kitchen on grill and chicken and the line. These are some technical McDonald's terms I'm whipping out here. That is like assembling the burgers. That's the line where you actually assemble not just the burgers, but everything that you get served, essentially. You put it together and then put it into the wrapping or the box and deliver it down the conveyor belt. But chicken used to be my favourite station. That was the, I think, nicest one to be on. So there you go. Fun fact about me for you there. Former McDonald's employee. Now, with that said, I don't know why I saluted. Who am I saluting? Am I saluting Mr. McDonald? Curious. But, ladies and gentlemen, with that said, let us get on to some Greek. And let's start by talking about the meaning and the formation of the future indicative passive. Now, as a reminder, we're looking at the passive voice, which is where the action of the verb is happening to the subject. The subject is on the receiving end of the action of the verb, which is the reversal or inversion of the traditional role of the subject with an active verb. We've done the present indicative passive, which means I am X'd or I am being X'd. We've done the imperfect indicative passive, which means I was being X'd or I used to be X'd. We have done, thirdly, the aorist indicative passive, which means I was X'd as a complete action in the past. And now we come to the future indicative passive. The future indicative passive means I will be X'd. This conveys an action that will happen to the subject in the future. So, for instance, I will be carried. I will be eaten. That's a bit cannibalistic. Well, unless I get eaten by an animal, like a dinosaur or a lion or something. Anyway, I will be carried, I will be eaten, I will be praised, I will be loved, I will be killed, hopefully not. In England today, though, the probability is higher than it has been at other points in history. I will be hated, hopefully not once again, but it's possible. I will be X'd, okay? Lots of examples there. Now, of course, the person changes according to, in Greek, the ending of the verb. So it's not just I will be X'd, but also you will be X'd, he, she, it will be X'd, we will be X'd, you plural will be X'd, and they will be X'd. All of those, though, convey an action that will happen to the subject. That is a future action that the subject is going to be on the receiving end of. Now, I should say that traditionally, the word shall is used in the I and we forms of the future. So if you want to be more traditional, you can say I shall be X'd and we shall be X'd, and then use the word will for the other persons. But nowadays, I do use will for all of them because that's what most of us do. So I have actually dropped my use of shall quite a bit nowadays. Sometimes I still use it, but in these slides I'm using will for all of them, okay? Anyway, that's the meaning of the future indicative passive, I will be X'd. What about the formation? Well, to learn how the future indicative passive is formed, you should have already learned how the aorist indicative passive is formed. So if you haven't, do go back and watch my last lesson on the aorist indicative passive. And the reason that you need to know that is because the future indicative passive is built upon the aorist passive, namely the aorist passive stem. So this is how we form the future indicative passive. To form the future indicative passive, we do the following. Firstly, we take the aorist passive stem. So, for example, with our verb power, the verb to stop, that's either paut or paust. As a reminder, we form the aorist passive stem of a verb standardly by adding theta or sigma theta to the end of the present stem. There are exceptions though, which I taught you about in my aorist indicative passive video. Anyway, we take the aorist passive stem, whatever that may be. So for power, that's either paut or paust. Now that we've got that stem paut or paust, the second step is we add ers to the end of it. So this would give us either pauters or pausters. That forms what we call the future passive stem. So we've taken the aorist passive stem, we've added ers to it to form the future passive stem. With regard to adding sigma, we've seen that in the future active as well, right? Where the defining feature of the future active for most verbs is that we add sigma to the end of the present stem. So we're doing that here as well, but we're also adding eta before the sigma. And as a result, we get a future passive that has ters near the end of it. And that will apply to all of the verbs which have theta in their aorist passive formation. You know, if it's a verb that uses theta in the aorist passive, like most verbs do, although I've mentioned the exceptions to look out for in my video on the aorist passive, then you will end up with ters in the future passive. So if you see this ters, it's a flag, a signpost that you're dealing with a future passive verb. And now that we've got this future passive stem, there's only one thing left to do, and that is to use the following person endings. Namely, omai, or a, etai, ometa, este, ontai. We have already met these endings, right? We met them in the present indicative passive. It's the exact same set of endings. And therefore, if you've already learned the present indicative passive, you've got no new learning to do in terms of the endings that are used. The only new bit is how we form this future passive stem. Okay? This is the bit that we're going to add those endings onto. And that's how we can distinguish between the present indicative passive and the future indicative passive, because the present indicative passive will just have the present stem. Paomai, for instance, would mean I am being stopped, or I am stopped in general. Whereas pautersomai would mean I will be stopped. Okay? Now, before I show you power fully conjugated in the future indicative passive, please do pause the video and ensure that you've got this information noted down. Now that you've got that noted down, let me show you how power goes in the future indicative passive. It goes as follows. Pautersomai, pautersei or pautersei, pautersetai, pautersometa, pauterseste, and pautersontai. you can see that we get some long forms in the future indicative passive, right? With quite a bit of aspiration, like in, for instance, pauter someta, we will be stopped. But this is how power goes, provided that we're using the aorist passive stem, which just has theta as opposed to sigma theta. You can see what each of these forms means. So pauter somai, I will be stopped, or traditionally I shall be stopped. Pauter se, or pauter se, you singular will be stopped, and so on. Now, how would this look if we had the version with sigma? Because remember, power has an aorist passive with just theta, but it also has an aorist passive with sigma theta, which is something that verbs that usually have a weak aorist in the active voice often do. They add sigma theta often, or at least sometimes, as opposed to theta on its own. So if we're dealing with the version that's got paust, instead, it would look like this. Pauster somai, pauster se, or pauster se, pauster setai, pauster someta, pauster seste, pauster sondai. My goodness. So, with the sigma, we get even longer forms, of course, and forms that are even trickier to say. And I think we'll see even trickier verbs a little bit later in this lesson. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, please do pause the video and ensure that you've got these paradigms noted down. Now that you've got those paradigms noted down, I have some good news for you. That's all there is to the future indicative passive. The tricky part is knowing the aorist passive stem, okay? That's the most difficult part. And I've taught you some patterns and rules of formation with regard to the aorist passive. However, I will say that there are lots of irregularities, and therefore it is often best to check if you're uncertain. In fact, I would say it's always best to check if you're uncertain. And you can do that through a site like Wiktionary, through the Oxford Grammar of Classical Greek for at least 200 common irregular verbs. Or, in the case of my course, you can do that through the full vocabulary list, which I released about a week ago. I'm going to update that with each lesson. You can find a link to it, I should say to them because there's two versions of it, an alphabetized version and a categorized version, in the description below. Okay, so in those vocab lists, you will find the aorist passive of a verb, and this is actually a good point I should mention here. For instance, if you look up power in the aorist passive, then one option will be paustern. That's the sigmatic version, okay? The version with the sigma. Now, you would also see pautern without the sigma, but say you encountered this as the aorist passive of power. To work out what the aorist passive stem is, you need to drop the augment, which is the epsilon at the start. If you don't have the epsilon at the start and instead have a lengthened vowel or diphthong, then you'll need to shorten that to what it originally was. So we drop the augment and we drop the person ending, which is the ern. And therefore, the aorist passive stem is paust. Okay? That is our aorist passive stem, which the future passive is built upon. So if you're ever in doubt about the aorist passive stem of a verb, look it up in one of the ways that I've described, and then drop the augment, either by dropping the epsilon or by shortening the long vowel that you see at the start, or the diphthong that you see at the start, and drop the person ending. Then you'll be left with the aorist passive stem that the future passive uses as its basis. Okay? So, that's how we find the aorist passive stem and form the future passive. And as I said, that's all there is to forming the future passive. The good news about that is there isn't much to remember. We just need to remember those 3 steps. 1, take the aorist passive stem. 2, add s to the end of it. 3, use the endings omai, a or a, etai, and so on. But like I said, the tricky part is making sure that we know the aorist passive stem which it's going to use as its foundation. That's particularly important if you're doing English to Greek, but if you're doing Greek to English, usually you'll be able to recognise which verb the aorist passive stem is from. So it won't be as big an issue if you're just doing Greek to English, which is what we're usually doing in the study of classics. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, let us go on to exercise 1. Here I've got 8 future indicative passive verbs for you. Some of these verbs are regular and have formed their aorist passive stem in the usual way, given the rules that I taught you about in the last lesson, whereas others are irregular and they're ones that I flagged as verbs to learn the aorist passive form of in the last lesson, okay? Anyway, here they're all in the future passive, but as I've been emphasising, that's built upon the aorist passive stem. So, with what I've taught you about the future passive in mind, please do pause the video and translate these 8 verbs into English. Okay, the first one, which is a monstrous looking verb, is boer ter someta. Goodness gracious me. That means we will be helped, or we shall be helped. So, I think it'll be useful, just for this first one, to illustrate how we got to this. This is from the verb boer ter or, the verb to help, literally to run to a shout for someone in the dative. Now, it's a contract verb in epsilon. When we add theta to the stem of a contract verb, the contract vowel lengthens. And therefore, this is going to become boer tet when we add theta, okay? The epsilon is going to lengthen to eta. That is our aorist passive stem. We then add eta sigma to it to form the future passive stem, giving us boer ter ters, goodness me. And then, if we want to say we will have it done to us, we need the ometa ending. So that is how we got to the form boer ter someta. 3 thetas in one word, and 3 etas in one word. Craziness. 3 thetas, 3 etas. What a mental word. Now, how about the second one, poter setai? Well, that means he, she, or it will be drunk. Not drunk as in intoxicated, but drunk as in will be guzzled, you know. I don't know how a he or a she is going to be consumed orally, but this would usually be for an it, right? For a drink. Like if you wanted to say the wine will be drunk, then it would be ho oinos poter setai. And the verb that we're dealing with there is the verb pinor, meaning drink. It's got an irregular aorist passive epotan, which I mentioned in the last lesson. So the aorist passive stem of that verb is pot. And that's how we've gotten to poter setai. How about 3? Timer ter sontai. That means they will be honoured. That's from the verb timao, which means honour. We have lengthened the alpha when adding theta. We've added s and then the ontai ending for they will have it done to them. What about archteseste? Well, this means you plural will be ruled, or you plural will be begun. I suppose it will be ruled. But in principle, it could be either. This is from the verb archor, the verb to rule or begin. Now, one thing I have neglected to point out explicitly is that in the future indicative passive, although it's built on the aorist passive stem, we don't have the augment because the augment is only used in past tenses in the indicative mood. Okay, so we only see the augment in the imperfect, in the aorist, and in the pluperfect, which are technically considered the past tenses. And so, although we've got the aorist passive stem, which is the present stem with theta added usually, and any other appropriate changes made, we don't have the augment. So that's why this alpha hasn't lengthened to eta. Now, number 5 is enechtese. This means you singular will be carried or born. Born with an E, as in bear. That was me bearing something, by the way. So you singular will be carried, you singular will be born, you singular will be brought. Any of those would be fine. This is from the verb perro, which has a rather irregular aorist passive. The aorist passive of the verb perro is enechten. So the aorist passive stem is enecht. And then we add es and then the u singular ending. 6 is also a verb that's got an irregular aorist passive. Leptersomai means I will be taken or I will be seized. This is from lambano, the verb to take or to seize. It's got the irregular aorist passive elepten. 7, dotersetai means he, she or it will be given. This is from didomi, the aorist passive of which is edoten. I said that we should, in my view, learn the aorist passive forms of the me verbs on their own, and didomi goes to edoten. And last but not least, number 8 is optersontai, meaning they will be seen. This is from the verb horao, which I explained has an irregular aorist passive, namely optan, the stem of which would therefore be opt. If you have questions about any of these, please do put them in the comments below. Otherwise, though, let us go on to exercise 2, which is 5 future indicative passive verbs for you to translate into Greek. Okay, so we've got some cheeky English to Greek here. Now, if you need to look up any of these verbs, then you can do so using my vocabulary list linked in the description below. The full vocabulary list, that is. If you use on Windows Control F or on Mac Command F, you'll be able to search for a word in English, like send, for instance, and it will lead you to the verb pempo. Okay? I'm sure many of you watching will know that shortcut, Control F or Command F, but not everyone will, so I thought it worth mentioning, because we all have different levels of experience with technology. So that shortcut that I just mentioned was what you can use when you open the PDF that I've put on my website with all of the vocab on it. Once you've got that open, if you use Control F or Command F, you'll be able to search up any English term and find the corresponding Greek term in my vocab list. Now, if you want to challenge yourself, you can do it without looking at the vocab list. That's the hard mode version of this exercise, okay? So if you want to do it hard mode, then don't use the vocab list, but otherwise feel free to. Please do pause the video and translate these 5 English future indicative passive verbs into Greek. Okay, number 1, I will be loved would be philetersomai. Phileo is the verb to love. When we add theta, the contract vowel epsilon lengthens to eta. We add es and then omai to form I will be loved. Philetersomai. It will be placed requires us to use the verb titemi. And the aorist passive of titemi is eteten. And therefore, if we want this verb in the future passive in the it form, we would get tetesetai. They will be sent requires us to use pempor, and the particular form we're after here is pemptersontai. When we add theta to the stem pemp, it causes the pi to become a phi, so we get pempt as the aorist passive stem, then we add es and ontai, for they will be sent. You plural will be conquered would be niketerseste. Nikao is a contract verb, we lengthen the alpha when theta is added, and then the rest should be clear from the formation of the future passive. And then the fifth, we will be heard, would be akoustersometa, which is a pretty monstrous looking verb, or maybe a beautiful verb, depending on how you look at it, but it's a lot to say. It's a mouthful, right? Akoustersometa. Now, the aorist passive of akouor is erkoustern. It's a normal aorist passive. But remember, we don't have the augment in the future. The aorist passive stem, unaugmented, is akoust. Then we add es to that and ometa to get the we will be ext form. In this instance, we will be heard or listened to. Would be another translation of the Greek, but we've gone from English to Greek. Anyway, any questions, let me know in the comments, please. Otherwise, let's do some sentences involving future indicative passive verbs. These sentences have been created by yours truly, hence the lack of accents. Please do pause the video and translate them into English. Okay, for the first one, you should have put, these politicians will be hated by the citizens. Or these orators or public speakers will be hated by the citizens. The reason it means this is because we have these politicians, orators, public speakers in the nominative plural, hutoi hoi rhetores. Our verb is misetersontai, from the verb miseor, the verb to hate. Here it's in the future indicative passive they form. So these politicians will be hated, hypo, that's by, when it's followed by the genitive and is near a passive verb. When it's going with a passive verb, hypo plus genitive means by, indicating the agent of the passive verb, and therefore these politicians, orators, will be hated by the citizens. For number 2, you should have put, the slave will be sacrificed, for he does not honour the master. We know that it means this because the slave's in the nominative at the start, hodoulos. Then we've got tutersetai. Now, edutern is the aorist passive of tuor, the verb to sacrifice. So the aorist passive stem of tuor is just tut, tau upsilon theta. And thus, that's how we've got this particular future passive form here. We've taken tut, we've added es, and then we've added the etai ending. So the slave will be sacrificed. Gar means for, giving the reason for the previous clause or sentence. For, we've got the master, ton despoten, in the accusative. So he's going to be the object of whatever verb is coming next. U timai. U means not. Timao is the verb to honour. For, he, she, or it, given the context, it's the slave, so he. For gar, he does not honour or is not honouring, present tense. Tima A has contracted to timai, the master. Okay, that's how we got to that. So in virtue of not being sufficiently respectful, the slave will be sacrificed. I was going to say poor guy, but if he's been that disrespectful, then, you know. But then again, he is a slave. Difficult situation, ethically problematic. Let me know your thoughts about that in the comments below. Does the doulos deserve it, or does he not? We don't have enough data, I think. Or maybe we do. It's difficult. It's difficult, ladies and gentlemen. It's tricky. Tricky matter. Okay, my first degree was in philosophy. So ethical dilemmas are up my alley, or they used to be. Not so much nowadays. Thirdly, we've got oida hoti he polis o ter setai. This one means, I know that the city will be saved. The verb soisdor means save. In the aorist passive, it goes to sortern, and therefore the aorist passive stem is sort, which is how we got to sorter setai for he, she, or it will be saved. In this instance, it's the city, because the city's in the nominative, so the city will be saved, but we've got oida hoti at the start. Oida is the irregular verb to know. In this form, it's in the I form, so I know. Hoti can mean that, it can also mean because, amongst other things. We'll learn the other uses later on, but so far we've met it as meaning that. So I know that the city will be saved, word for word. Fourthly, we've got hoi polemioi heiuretersontai kai apoktantersontai, meaning the enemies will be found and killed. Or you could have said the enemies will be found and will be killed, or and they will be killed. I've abbreviated it just by putting killed, because then we understand the will be for a second time anyway. But you could have specified the will be or they will be. And this is quite a straightforward one, I hope, although we have got two slightly irregular future passives. So that part is tricky. But anyway, we've got the enemies, hoi polemioi, in the nominative plural. They're the subject of these two passive verbs, which are joined by kai. So the enemies, heiuretersontai, they will be found. This is from heiuriskor, the verb to find, which has the aorist passive heiuretern or heiuretern. As a result, the aorist passive stem is heiuret, which is a bit weird. Recognisable, but strange because of this epsilon. Slightly strange, at least. And apoktainor goes to apektantern in the aorist passive, so that's also slightly weird. Anyway, we've got find and kill in the they form of the future indicative passive here, joined by the kai. Now, ladies and gentlemen, having done those, let us go on to some extracts of actual Greek. Okay, so snippets for the time being, but we'll work our way up to longer extracts in the future. Snippets of actual Greek texts. Now, these first two are from Plato's dialogue, The Republic, which is widely regarded as his masterwork. I would perhaps challenge that. I think the Phaedo might be better than The Republic. I know The Republic is longer and more elaborate in its project and more grand in a sense, but the Phaedo, it has a hold on me, you know. So anyway, if you haven't read them, check out Plato's Phaedo and Republic and see which you think is better. My heart is with the Phaedo, I think. Now, anyway, these two quotes are from Plato's Republic, and before you get to work on them, I just want to say a few things. One is, of course, given the focus of this lesson, all of the extracts that we're dealing with involve a future indicative passive verb. But I have some particular warnings about these extracts. The first one involves this verb retersetai. Now, I've just put this note that legor, as a reminder, can go to ereten in the aorist passive, meaning I was said, I was spoken, I was told. Now, when you get rid of the augment, you're left with reten, but you don't ever have just double row at the start of a Greek word. And so one of these rows disappears. And so the actual aorist passive stem is ret. So this has been a long way of saying that this retersetai is a future indicative passive form of legor. Okay? And the last warning I need to give you is that in the second extract, the subject of our future indicative passive verb is a male. That will tell you which pronoun to use, okay? So, with that in mind, please do pause the video and translate these two extracts from Plato's Republic. Okay, to go through the answers, number one is polou paradoxan retersetai, meaning much will be said contrary to opinion. The reason it means this is because our subject is actually polou, which is the neuter singular of the adjective polus, meaning much or many. Here it's being used on its own substantively. So it's literally meaning much here being used as a noun. In other words, a lot. You could say a lot if you wanted to. Much or a lot, retersetai, will be said, paradoxan. Now, para plus accusative can mean alongside, but it can also mean against or contrary to. So you could have said against or contrary to, doxan, opinion or belief. Doxa, I'm shocked that I haven't introduced it until this point, but to be fair, you can only introduce so many words at one time. Doxa means opinion or belief. It's a really important Greek word. It gives us quite a few English words. For instance, it gives us the word paradox. Both of these words together give us the word paradox. A paradox is etymologically something that's contrary to opinion, something that contradicts opinion or belief. That's literally what a paradox is. Now, with regard to the second one, epainetersetai hupumon, this means he will be praised by you. Now, this is from the verb epainetor, the verb to praise, the aorist passive of which is epainetan, and thus the aorist passive stem of which is epainet. So we've got he, she, or it will be praised, but I told you that the subject's male, so he will be praised. Hupo, humorn. Humorn is the genitive form of the you plural pronoun, the second person plural pronoun, humeis, and it's in the genitive following hupo, indicating the agent of this passive verb. Now, you can see the pi has become a phi, and we've got this apostrophe here because the omicron has been elided, and when a pi is followed by a rough breathing, the aspiration spreads onto it, making it into phi. So that's why hupos become hup here. Let us go on. Here we have an extract from a work of the historian Xenophon. We have got a more substantial extract here, and unfortunately, a lot of the vocab is new. However, you can do basically everything else, given what I've taught you grammatically, okay? Now, the only thing we are unfamiliar with grammatically is this word orn. This word orn, I have glossed for you as meaning as being. Okay? Literally, it means being. And we'll talk about what type of word it is later on. As I've put here, it's called a participle, and this is, I believe, the first participle that we've met. It's either the first or the second. We haven't met many. I'll explain what participles are later on. For now, it will suffice to say that they are, at least in the present active, ing words. So words like running, swimming, eating, or in this instance, being, okay? This is the present active participle of Amy. But like I said, we will do a deep dive on participles, which are very important in Greek later on, okay? For now though, just translate on by saying as being, okay? So I would advise you to do the first three words and then to do geloios on, as being geloios. And that should enable you to put this sentence together, okay? And one more thing, the subject here is a guy. We do know that from the endings of the adjectives, but just to be very clear, the person being spoken about here, the subject, is a guy, okay? So make sure you use the right pronoun when you translate the verb. Please do pause the video and translate this slightly more substantial extract from Xenophon. Okay, what this extract means is, or he will be immediately exposed as being worthy of ridicule, and not only a bad aulos player, but also a boastful man. With regard to how it means this, we've got the word which we've met as meaning than, but it can also mean or. It's actually a separate word, but it looks the same. If you see with a grave on it, in dictionary form it will have an acute on it, but with an acute or a grave, therefore, means either or it means than, okay? With a circumflex, however, means either that you're dealing with a yes or no question. It can be a synonym of the word ara with a circumflex, or it means indeed. So with a circumflex means either a yes or no question or indeed, whereas with an acute in dictionary form but a grave when it appears in a text means either or it means than. In this context, it means or. So or, eutus, that word means immediately, right away, straight away, different ways of translating it. And then we have our future indicative passive verb, elenktersetai. He will be exposed, from the verb elenchor, as I glossed it down here. So, or he will be immediately exposed, or exposed immediately. On means as being, literally just being, but here I would say as being geloios. If you're geloios, then somebody can gelaor at you. They can laugh at you. So as being ridiculous, as being laughable, as being worthy of ridicule, etc. Kai and umonon, and then umonon is going with Allah kai. This is a set expression that means not only, but also. So, he will be exposed as being worthy of ridicule, and not only an auletes kakos, a bad flute player or a bad aulos player, but also an anthropos alasdon, a boastful man or a pretentious man. Pretentious fellow, boastful fellow. So whoever is being spoken about here will apparently, in one of two circumstances, because this is an or at the start here, so either this will be the case that we can't see in this extract, or he will be exposed immediately as being worthy of ridicule and not only a bad flute player, but also a boastful man. So I'm assuming that if somebody is put to the test with regard to their skill in playing the aulos or the flute, then they're either going to prove themselves to be true and honest with regard to what they say about how well they can play the aulos, or in this circumstance that we have on the screen, they're going to be exposed as a bad aulos player and a braggart, a boastful man, okay? Now, with regard to the aulos, I gloss auletes as flute player, and that's because the aulos was a type of flute. To show you an aulos, here is a bit of Greek art depicting an aulos. You can see it's like this double flute, right? That chap is playing the aulos. Here's another one with a lady playing the aulos. I presume that's a lady. Looks like a lady to me. So yeah, the aulos was kind of a double flute. So we've got the man playing the aulos, the lady playing the aulos, and who's this playing the aulos? Do you see the resemblance? Okay, it kind of looks like I'm milking udders. That's a bit that could be taken out of context, but it's more like this because I was kind of gripping. It's more like this, you know, that's me playing the aulos, okay? Now, I think that our robotic friend that made this image has given me a better bit of facial hair than I actually have, you know? However, you can see it has missed out the middle of the moustache, which is true to reality. Check that out, because I do have the inverse Hitler, you know? Hitler only had the middle bit. I've only got the side bits. I just need to transplant Hitler's moustache onto mine, and then I'll have a full moustache, you know? But anyway, there's me playing the aulos in some imagined Greek art. I hope you like it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we've actually got 7 extracts today. This is a long lesson, but I hope you're finding it useful. Here are the 4th and 5th extracts. The first of which comes from Hippocrates, the father of medicine, and the second of which comes from a guy named Heron. Heron? Maybe Heron. Literally in Greek, his name is Heron. And some people transliterate it as hero. They drop the new from the end, like we do with Plato's name. Others keep the, I said new, others keep the N sound in transliterating it. Anyway, we've got an extract from Hippocrates and another from Heron. And I have nothing to warn you about with regard to the first extract, but with regard to the second, one thing I would like to note is that to hygron is a substantive adjective because hygros means wet. So to hygron literally means the wet thing. What that's used to mean is the liquid, okay? You might assume it's the water, but in this context, it's the liquid. The wet thing is the liquid, okay? And the other thing is kora has a new meaning here. We've met it with other forms related to kora, but I hadn't actually listed it as a meaning of kora before, namely place or space. So, bearing those things in mind, please do pause the video and translate these 2 extracts. Okay, number 4. Kaita loipa heiuretesetai means, and the remaining things will be found. Loipos means remaining, rest, other, left over. And so this literally says, and the remaining, understand, things, because it's a substantive adjective in the neuter plural, heiuretesetai, will be found. But look at this verb. It's in the he, she, it form. Why is it in the he, she, or it form when we've got a plural subject? Because it's a schnurb. Okay, neuter plural subjects like ta loipa take singular verbs. Okay, so that's why. And the other things, the remaining things, you could just say the rest, will be found. And 5, eis ekeinan enechtesetai ten koran to hygron means the liquid will be brought into that place, or will be carried into that place, will be born into that place. That's a bit weird in English, saying will be born into that place. But will be carried, will be brought into that place. The reason it means this is because we've got that substantive that I spoke about, to hygron, in the nominative. That's our subject here. Then we've got enechtesetai as our verb, our future indicative passive verb. This is from pero. So he, she, or it will be carried, will be brought. Okay? With the subject being the liquid. So the liquid, literally the wet thing, will be brought eis ekeinan ten koran. Into, or to, ekeinan, that, ten koran. The word that is agreeing with ten koran, place or space. Sixthly, for Caroline, who made the frog story at the start of this lesson, we have got an extract of Euripides, which we saw Froggy delving into? I think you can say either, right? Diving into, okay, we saw him diving into some Euripides, whose work Orestes we see a snippet of on the screen. Please do pause the video and translate this extract. Okay, what this extract means is, how will I be saved alone, brotherless, fatherless, and friendless? Or words to that effect. The reason it means this is because we've got the word pos, which, when it's got a circumflex, means how as a question. We know that it's a question as well from the semicolon looking thing at the end. So, how, and the verb is sotersomai. I will be saved from soisdor. So how will I be saved? Moner. Monos means alone. So how will I be saved alone? And then we have three adjectives that are being used to describe the subject. Namely, brotherless, fatherless, friendless. I've added in commas and an and, but literally we've just got those three adjectives in rapid succession in the Greek. You could say without a brother, without a father, and without a friend. That would also be, of course, fine. So the speaker here is asking how she is going to survive, how she's going to bear it. Literally, how she's going to be saved without a brother, without a father, and without a friend when she's all alone by herself. Quite a classic, tragic line, something like this. And by the way, monos you can see is in the feminine because the subject is a woman, right? But these adjectives look masculine. They look masculine. The reason for that is because they're all compound adjectives with either alpha privative or alpha nu, which is alpha privative when it's added onto a stem that begins with a vowel. It's also alpha privative, but with a nu after it. Anyway, they've all got alpha privative at the start, and so they're all compound adjectives. And as I taught you in the lesson on two termination adjectives, compound adjectives are two termination. So that means in the masculine and feminine, they use the exact same set of endings. Namely, those that would ordinarily be the masculine ones. For the ones that would usually be 2-1-2, that is. They're just 2-2 instead. So in the masculine and feminine, they use the second declension masculine endings. So that's why we've got os, even though the subject is a woman. Finally, we have got an extract from the book of Revelation, which is the final book of the New Testament. Now, it's probably my favourite book of the Bible, I would say, in that I find it the most interesting. If you don't know, the book of Revelation gives us a vision that a man named John allegedly had. And this vision is meant to basically unveil, on a standard interpretation, what's going to happen in the future. Okay? There are different interpretations, but I would say conventionally Revelation has been taken to be about what's going to happen in the future. John is shown a vision of things to come. And it's where we get lots of famous images from, like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And it's partly where we get the image of Jesus as a lamb, because in the throne room of God, which we're shown in the book of Revelation, there is a lamb, a slaughtered lamb in the middle, and that is Jesus, this lamb that's been slaughtered. The really epic thing is that although Jesus is depicted as a slaughtered lamb, he's also profoundly just, and evil is punished severely by the lamb. You get the wrath of the lamb in the book of Revelation, you know, because despite being forgiving and loving, God is also, according to the Bible and Revelation, just and is going to punish evil. And this extract comes as part of this series of future events. And we get, and when 1,000 years have passed, that's what the first bit that I've cut out says, so and so will happen. Now, I just need to warn you about one thing, and that is that this word autou, you would expect to be how to or how to, given what I've taught you. That is because it means literally of him. And with regard to what I've taught you, if you want to say of him concerning something that the subject owns, so literally of himself, then you should use how to or how to. However, in Koine Greek, which the New Testament is written in, that rule came to be neglected quite a bit, and they use autou to mean of him, or in more natural English, his, even when that person is the subject, okay? But in classical Greek, if you see autou, then it's going to be of him, i.e. his, talking about somebody that's not the subject. But on this occasion, it's talking about somebody that is the subject, okay? Please do pause the video and translate this extract. Okay, what you should have put here is, and when 1,000 years have passed, Satan will be released from his prison, or from his guard, from his watch. Satan is the subject. This irregular noun, satanas, is in the nominative. Our verb is lutersetai. He, she, or it will be released. Here it's he because it's about Satan. So when 1,000 years have passed, Satan will be released. Ek tes pulakers. Ek is out of or from in the sense of out of. From, literally the prison, the guard. Pulaker means a guard, as in like a guarding, the act of being guarded. It's related to the verb pulator and also the noun pulax, which are all to do with guarding. Anyway, Satan will be released from literally the guard or the prison, autou, of him. Usually that would be of him, somebody that's not the subject, like somebody else owns the prison. But here the author is trying to convey that it's Satan's prison that he's in, you know. It's his prison in a sense. And so, literally the prison of him, the him here is referring to Satan, which is a bit weird. It's violating the usual rules of Greek. The author of Revelation does violate the rules of Greek elsewhere, but this is a more common issue with Koine Greek, this rule kind of being neglected in Koine Greek. You see it elsewhere in the New Testament too. Anyway, in more natural English, rather than of him, we would say his, and so altogether this would be, and when 1,000 years have passed, Satan will be released from his prison. Because if you read all of the events concerning what will allegedly happen in the future on the standard interpretation of Revelation, then at one point Satan is dragged down to a pit and imprisoned for 1,000 years. After which point he's released. He will be released, as we're told here. And he then wreaks havoc and is ultimately defeated by God and is thrown into a lake of eternal fire. Quite epic stuff. Speaking of which, I was mentioning things we get, like famous images we get from Revelation. Another one is the image of the Leviathan, the sea monster. That's a picture from Revelation. The idea of the beast, you know, the number of the beast, that comes from Revelation as well. We get quite a lot from it. The mark of the beast is another thing. Anyway, it's a really interesting book. Now, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, let's summarize our learning for today. Today we've learned that the future indicative passive means I will be X'd. Or whoever the equivalent person is, will be X'd. Or if it's I or we, traditionally, shall be X'd. The future indicative passive is formed by taking the aorist passive stem, adding ers to it, and then using the endings omai, or a, etai, ometa, este, ondai, which we already know from the present indicative passive. Now, in addition to this, we've learned quite a bit of vocab today. We've learned a new verb, the verb elenchor, meaning expose, refute, or cross-examine, depending on the context. This gives us the Socratic method, the method which Socrates used to refute people with regard to their commonly held beliefs, things that they'd just taken for granted. He used the so-called elenchus, in Greek elenchos, which is the method of cross-examination, of refutation, where Socrates would ask questions that would lead people to realize that the beliefs that they held were not actually correct. We've also learned a group of new nouns, or one noun with an updated meaning, namely kora, that's the one with the updated meaning, but the others are new. I have included adelpos and pater, even though we didn't actually explicitly see them, we saw adjectives which were built upon them. But I've included them because they're really useful nouns to know, and we did, in effect, see them, but just within an adjective. Pater gives us so many words, the stem of which is pater with a short epsilon, or sometimes just patr, depending on the particular form. We can look at how pater declines in the future, but that stem, patr, gives us so many words, right? Like, for instance, paternal, and the word patriarchal, for instance, coming from pater and from the verb archo, the verb to rule, right? We've also met a new proper noun, satanas, meaning Satan, which is an irregular one. I've put its endings, its case endings in brackets there. And we've also met a handful of new adjectives, all of which are on the screen. Moreover, we've met a new adverb, a new conjunction, namely the word ere. That, I guess we could regard that as an update concerning the entry ere, because we've already met ere as meaning then. But bear in mind, the same word, or at least the word that looks the same, a word that looks the same, also means or. So if you see ere with an acute in dictionary form, but a grave in a text, it means either or than. If it's going with a comparative adjective, it will mean than, but usually it has the meaning or, like either this or this. In fact, it can be paired, ere to mean either or. We'll look at that in the future though. Speaking of pairs, ulmonon alakai means not only, but also. Which is, I said an idiom, but it's not really an idiom. It's more of a set phrase. There we go, that's better. It now says set phrase. That's more accurate, but I suppose I'll have to put it in the idioms box on my vocab list. Unless I put it in the miscellaneous box, but I'll decide that later, okay? I'll decide that later. Speaking of which, all of this new vocab will be on the version 2 PDF of the full vocab list, which will be on my website at the link in the description below at the time of you watching this video, okay? It will have a V2 signifying that it's the second version, and any changes when compared to the first version will be listed at the bottom of the document. With all of that said and done, ladies and gentlemen, I have put some ancient Greek frogs on the screen to brighten your day. You can see that this lady is giving them something, or she's about to. What's she about to give them? She's about to give them a jar of crickets, which frogs love to gobble up. They're going to have a feast because of this lady. And so, how might we describe this or that lady? Well, we could say, Ekeina herguna huboton batrachon piletesetai. And what would that mean? Well, to reveal the answer, it would mean that woman will be loved by the frogs. So that's how I managed to get a future indicative passive verb into this caption, okay? That woman will be loved by the frogs because she's about to give them an absolute feast of tasty crickets. Tasty for a frog, not for me. I'm not into eating insects. I know the powers that be are encouraging that nowadays, but I'm not really into that. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not going to be gobbling up crickets anytime soon, hopefully, at least. Oh, that's something else we get from the book of Revelation. We get the word apocalypse. Well, I don't know if that's the first use, but that certainly popularized it because the book of Revelation is called the Apocalypse of John. Now, oh my goodness, I'm still teaching Greek an hour and 45 minutes into recording this on the thank you slide, but if you're still watching this, an apocalypse comes from the word apokalypsis. Now, apokalyptor means to uncover or to unveil. And so an apokalypsis is literally like an unveiling. It's like taking the veil off of something, you know? And the Apocalypse of John, therefore, is where we have the curtain on the throne room of God and also on the standard interpretation, future events, pulled back. We're shown the secrets of what's going to happen. You know, there's an unveiling. And because it's about, traditionally, future things and the end of time, that is why the word apocalypse is used in the way it is today. What reminded me of that is because I thought, I'm not going to be eating crickets unless we're like in the apocalypse, and I might be scavenging for crickets. But otherwise, no. Anyway, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If you've stuck around to this point, let me know, okay? Share that in the comments. I'll be very impressed because it's been a long lesson. This is going to be a mammoth of an editing process that I'm about to undertake. My goodness. Anyway, you're the best. I'll see you again next time.